For half a century, the Strait of Hormuz has been Iran's primary geopolitical lever. This critical waterway funnels 20% of global seaborne oil. But since late February, the Revolutionary Guard has used asymmetric tactics to obstruct that flow, effectively closing the corridor. This shows the immediate market reaction. Brent crude climbed to $95 a barrel, and average gasoline prices jumped more than $1 a gallon almost overnight. That disruption quickly reached deeper into the economy. Airlines saw jet fuel prices surge 95% across North America, while shipping companies raised freight rates across major trade routes. These rising transportation costs are now pushing up prices for consumer goods worldwide. While the blockade appears to grant Iran leverage over the global economy, it has forced a realignment among powers that historically disagreed on handling Tehran. For years, China has served as Iran's primary customer. By purchasing heavily discounted crude, Beijing provided the revenue Tehran needed to bypass Western sanctions and fund its military programs. The scale of this trade was significant. Iran was exporting roughly 1.38 million barrels of oil per day to China, much of it passing through this vital terminal. But the Revolutionary Guard overlooked a critical detail. This data shows that nearly half of China's total oil imports rely on this exact waterway. By closing the strait, Iran placed China's own economic stability at risk. China maintains a strategic reserve of about 1.39 billion barrels, which could cover roughly 120 days of imports. However, Beijing has signaled that cheap Iranian oil is no longer worth the risk of a long-term disruption to its energy security. By treating the strait as a weapon, Iran targeted its most important sponsor. This has forced China to reconsider the cost of its relationship with Tehran. That recalculation became clearly visible to the world during a recent high-stakes summit in Beijing. U.S. and Chinese leaders issued a joint declaration demanding the immediate reopening of the strait. For the first time in decades, Washington and Beijing are publicly coordinating their approach toward Iran. This unprecedented coordination has created a massive dual-front pressure campaign. In the region, the U.S. maintains an imposing and heavily armed naval presence, while also imposing fresh sanctions on 12 entities, including the shipping and financial networks that allow Iranian oil to reach Asian markets. China is responding by exploring more reliable alternatives. While American crude is more expensive and requires logistical adjustments for Chinese refineries, Beijing is signaling a growing interest in U.S. energy. Refineries are now studying the logistics for increasing purchases from American production hubs in Texas, Louisiana, and Alaska. This shift is beginning to redirect the flow of global energy, constricting the revenue streams that Tehran has relied on to sustain its economy. The consequences are visible on the ground. Satellite imagery of Karg Island shows that Iran's primary export terminal is now almost silent. With storage tanks filling to capacity, the regime has been forced to reduce production. In response, the Revolutionary Guard is doubling down on its asymmetric strategy, swarming the strait to make commercial shipping incredibly hazardous. Their ultimate goal is to ensure that global insurance premiums become far too expensive for commercial tankers to operate. They have deployed high-speed boats armed with rockets, kamikaze drones, and naval mines throughout the strait. They are no longer fighting for a conventional military victory. They are fighting to maintain their domestic influence and preserve the only strategic card they have left as their diplomatic support weakens. The leverage Iran has held over the strait for nearly 50 years is facing a new kind of pressure. Every day the strait remains closed, the regime loses hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, intensifying the strain on its internal budget. Washington is using this crisis to position American energy as a more stable alternative for Asian economies that were previously dependent on the Middle East. This represents a redirection of energy flows that have defined the region for decades, leaving the Iranian leadership increasingly isolated from its most important economic partners. Two scenarios could now play out. In the first, China applies its economic weight to force a reopening of the strait. This would see oil prices drop by $15 to $20 a barrel, providing global economic relief. However, if the Revolutionary Guard continues its harassment, insurance companies may withdraw coverage. This could push oil prices above $100, risking a global recession. The outcome will depend on whether the shared interests of Washington and Beijing can successfully pressure Tehran to back down. The strategic landscape of the Persian Gulf is being reshaped by the interaction between these two global powers. a shift prompted by a single, unexpected meeting in Beijing.